Welcome to Full Circle. I'm Suzanne McAllister. Thanks so much for joining us. On today's program, we're going to talk about a subject that we all need to be aware of, and that is reducing stress in the workplace. And stress left unchecked will and can lead to depression. We're going to talk about all of that on today's program with our experts from Christian Theological Seminary. Starting off our conversation, it's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Christina Davis. Dr. Davis is the Clinic Director and Assistant Professor of Pastoral Care and Counseling at CTS. It is great to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Susan.
You know, it seems like whenever we pick up the paper, we hear about one more tragic workplace death or some very big stressor that has made the headlines. What are your takes on what's going on out there in the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, even just this year, as we recount some of the headline events, there's been some really troubling occurrences. So even if we think back to the Germanwings pilot who, I mean, we may not know everything about the situation, but we do know that he was suffering with depression, and to the extent in which he was able to get help with that, or his employers knew how to help him with that, is not really clear. But what we do know is that there's been a tragedy here, and it gets us to thinking and talking about how we can be better at taking care of individuals who suffer with mental illness and are indeed workers. And we know that these individuals are not kind of few and far between as we talk about mental health. 1 in 4 adults in any given year has a mental illness, a diagnosable mental illness. So this is a very common phenomenon, so it's important that we make sure that we're talking about it and we're caring for ourselves, our loved ones, and our coworkers. And
you really bring up a lot of interesting points. One is the fact that we have someone who is depressed. We don't know whether individuals reach out and get the help, but then the employer oftentimes is in a situation where they need to keep that information private. So how do you protect the individual who may be suffering from mental illness, but also protect the employees who may be subjected to this person's outbursts, or in the cases of the Germanwings pilot, it took their life?
Yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes it is important to have confidentiality, that's kind of assured by the employer, that's a part of the workplace culture and environment, that employees know that they can come to their managers, they can come to their employers and really receive the same kind of protection, even by law, that other disabilities might receive if they meet criteria, that's something that they're protected by. So that needs to be kind of out front and center, I think, in workplaces to remind employees of that. But I also think that there's just these implicit messages sometimes that we get in our wider society, is the stigma around speaking up about these things. And so I do think that it's about also just feeling that it's okay and not feeling worried about kind of the shame that may accompany some persons when they think about sharing this with the people who can really help support them.
Sure, because as you say, it is not just the workplace, it is a global issue. But unfortunately, some workplaces have a culture that almost causes the employees to become more stressed. What are some of those triggers that we may need to be aware of in terms of our own workplace environment?
Sure. Well, we could talk about another workplace that's been kind of in the news recently. I think all workplaces have some version of this, but recently we heard about Amazon and how the workplace stress that was there, reportedly, that you can hear folks talking about it not being uncommon to see people break out into tears and in the workplace because of having received really blunt and kind of critical feedback, that there's high demands for accessibility. If they receive an email at midnight, then they're expected to respond within a certain time, or they receive an email saying, "Why haven't you responded? It's morning." And so there are these certainly examples that we can look around and say, this is a organizational kind of cultural piece that creates higher stress, and stress in and of itself, of course, is not bad. We need a certain amount of stress to be motivated, to kind of perform, but it's the chronic nature of stress that really can wear on us, our immune systems, and our our mental kind of ability to think clearly and be creative, those type of things are really diminished by chronic exposure to stress.
Sure, and if we find ourselves not sleeping and not wanting to go to work, we as employees may need to examine whether or not that is a good match for us in the workplace.
Certainly, certainly. I think that there are those signs that you can pay attention to in yourself. If you're finding yourself kind of anxious, and some signs physiologically can be kind of heart racing, just feeling very fatigued all the time, kind of not eating properly, that all of those are signs, I think, to think about how to have a healthier kind of work-rest balance so that you can recharge and return back to work.
That is such a good thing to keep in mind, the work-rest balance. Well, we are going to meet up with Dr. Davis a little bit later on in the program, but when we come back, we will talk about depression in the workplace and signs and symptoms that you need to be aware of. Stay with us. Welcome back to Full Circle. We're continuing our conversation about workplace stress. Another guest from Christian Theological Seminary joins me now. It's a pleasure to welcome Dr. Matthias Beyer. Dr. Matthias is the Associate Professor of Pastoral Theology and Mental Health Counseling and the Director of Clinical Mental Health Master's Program at CTS. It is great to have you here today.
Thank you. Wonderful to be here.
So many times when we talk about workplace stress, we put the emphasis on the person. But let's talk first of all about the economic impact of a company when there are depressed employees working there. I know you have some interesting facts to share.
Yes. There is a lot of fallout of when stress turns particularly into depression. About 200 million workdays in productivity are lost each day. And it costs companies roughly, the highest estimates are about $50 billion each year. So it's something that really costs companies a lot of money and is worth countering.
Absolutely, and that's what your field is, helping to reduce stress and understanding how unchecked stress can lead to depression. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned, again, the term unchecked stress, because stress in itself, as we heard already, is not itself a big problem. It can be problematic for yourself if you don't feel good about it. But when it is unchecked, it can turn into symptoms of depression. It can turn into other things, but depression is the major focus here. And it can lead to persistent feelings of sadness. It can lead into a deep sense of worthlessness. And I think in the workplace, what I find, particularly when I work with people, is very significant is guilt feelings. And so guilt feelings are really a sort of a double-sided sword, because they can on some level motivate somebody to take on something, but they also can make somebody take on too much. And so when it's too much, at some point, a person becomes sick or too stressed out, and so that's when productivity suffers, and it's not very healthy for the person.
Sure. So if somebody identifies with some of those symptoms that you just identified, what can they start to do about it? Should they go to their employer? Should they ask for assistance? I know many people, as Dr. Davis said earlier, there's that whole shame factor, and they don't want to talk about the fact that they're clinically depressed.
Yes, that's a major problem, because people think that if I share this with my employer, maybe my job won't be secure anymore. We're not talking mainly about military here, but in the military, that's often a factor why people don't share serious mental health concerns. But really, if people address it, they actually get the help. And so one way to address it, many workplaces have EAPs, employee assistance programs, where you can find a referral for some help with minor stress or major stress, or you can go to counseling centers. Through insurance, you might be able to find a provider. So there are there are a lot of things to do now. Unfortunately, only 30% of people that suffer from depression look for help each year.
That's staggering. In this day and age, when we do try to get over the shame and the guilt that's associated, that only that few people actually seek that help. So what advice do you have if somebody is working with someone and they've noticed a change in their behavior and they might suspect that their coworker is depressed? Sometimes that's an awkward position to be in. What do you do?
Yes. You know, I'm also very interested in how depression then leads to suicide. And it's sort of a similar thing. People ask, well, what do you do about it? And it's important that you don't sweep it under the carpet, that it's being directly addressed. So if you feel somebody is depressed, it's okay to ask them, are you going through a rough time? And to let them know, you know, I really care about you. Those are the most important things. People who are feeling depressed, or also people who are feeling suicidal, which is where worthlessness can go, need to know that somebody really cares. And then you can mention that to a person, you know, it's a temporary situation. What's really important is not to minimize the feelings. So it's really important to accept that these are the feelings. Don't minimize it. Avoid debating people and things like that. But let them know that you're there and help them find resources. So that's something. Now with people who are depressed, I have found that if a coworker recognizes that you're depressed and knows that you're very stressed out, it can go a long way if that coworker says, you know, I see that you're going through a rough time. Is there something I can help you with today? And maybe take something on if they can. That means a lot, because many people that feel depressed don't feel that they're worth that somebody else would do something for them.
Sure. So just reaching out in that kind word is often what you can do to make a big difference. But suicide is the worst case scenario with depression. If someone is feeling those suicidal thoughts right now, what would you say to them?
Well, I would say, you know, if you are knowing that you have suicidal feelings, ideations, reach out. There's a hotline which the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has. It's 1-800-273-TALK. Nationwide is a hotline that you can call and get some first help at that place.
Good advice. Well, we have lots more to talk about. Stay with us. We're back after this. Stress in the workplace is something that you should take very seriously. We will be putting our website up on the screen for you that you can get some resources that we're going to talk about in this segment of our program. We're continuing to talk with two representatives from Christian Theological Seminary, Dr. Matthias Beyer and Dr. Kristen Davis. Thank you for coming back on the set with us. So are you hopeful, Dr. Davis, that employers are starting to take this more seriously?
Sure, I have a lot of hope in that, and I think that there are some really kind of simple steps that folks can take if they're looking to improve their workplace environment when it comes to managing stress and promoting mental health in general. For one thing, just last month there was an article by Fortune that said that on average Americans are forfeiting 5 vacation days a year. They're just not using what's already provided for them. And of course we can look at the individual and say, please make sure you use your vacation days, but we can also look at the leaders of organizations in terms of modeling healthy kind of balance and time away from the office, encouraging that of their employees, and certainly kind of creating a culture where it's okay to use vacation days. So that's one thing I would mention. I think the other thing is just to remember that, if you've got to arrange time away from the office, to be proactive about your mental health. So if that's kind of attending appointments, whether that be with a counselor or with a psychiatrist, that those be seen as equivalent by employers to what it would mean to kind of arrange for any other doctor's visits, that kind of mental health is just as equally as important as our physical health. So those are just some practical things that I think workplaces could do to make sure that these type of things are supported.
Sure, and that vacation time is there for a reason. Dr. Beyer, are you hopeful that we are starting to raise the awareness of these kinds of issues, especially now that everything is, we're texting, we're emailing, everything's instantaneous, and it's almost as if we never break that cord to the office?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I am hopeful. I think we're starting to see that there is even on a national level, mental health parity. Dr. Davis mentioned sort of seeing physical and mental issues as equally valuable, and legislation has put that in writing right now, that employees actually have a right to get services, get the same kind of care, also through insurance and so on. So I'm hopeful, and I think that workplaces for several decades now have realized that if you are having workers that are feeling good, they're probably more productive, and your company will be doing better. So yes, I am hopeful that we're on a good trajectory. We have a long ways to go, but we're in the right direction.
You're right, we do have a long way to go, and we all know, unfortunately, there was the tragic shooting of Allison Parker live on television and her photographer, Adam Ward. And there was that struggle between the employer trying to protect the former employee because they knew he had anger issues, and then trying to also let people know that this person was of concern. Any advice from either one of you if an employer finds themselves struggling between privacy issues and protection of employees?
Yeah, well, I think, protecting life is the priority. And so privacy is important. And I think you can do both. You are not telling people that are not supposed to know about someone's mental health concerns. But if you have real concern that especially somebody who might be depressed and suicidal could also turn this into a homicidal scenario, then obviously you need to report it. And I think that's important. Yeah.
And all the more reason to take it seriously. Go ahead, Dr. Davis.
Absolutely, and just to add about kind of the risk of harm, to help even with understanding mental illness is to really also recognize that folks are typically more of a harm to themselves than they are to others, and they don't often present as violent. And I think that that's one of the things that we can do to also improve awareness, that as we manage these situations that are really difficult at times, certainly. Also to know that that folks with mental illness are more likely to kind of be victims of violence than they are to kind of be the perpetrators of violence. So I think those are important things.
And that's good to know, because we don't want to create this lopsided view of individuals with mental health. Before we run out of time, Dr. Beyer, resources. Tell us about where those resources are, and we'll have them up on our website as well.
Yeah, there's some national resources, like the NAMI, the National Alliance for Mental Illness, has local groups everywhere and has great resources. If there is a concern about suicidal feelings and also concern about any shame about it, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is a great resource. They have helped a lot of people. They're often connected to suicide prevention efforts in states, have also local chapters. So there are lots of resources there.
Well, good, and if you didn't get those down, we'll have them on our website. But I'd like to thank so much our guests from Christian Theological Seminary. I've been talking with Dr. Matthias Beyer, the Associate Professor of Pastoral Theology and Mental Health Counseling and the Director of Clinical Mental Health Master's Program. Also, Dr. Christina Davis, Clinic Director and Assistant Professor of Pastoral Care and counseling. You've been a great resource on our program. Thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Great
for
to be
having
here.
us, Suzanne.
And we are back with our music segment after this. R&B singer King Kendall joins us now. He's going to perform The Right Way. I'm so glad you could be with us. I'm Suzanne McAllister, and I'll see you next time, Full Circle.
Listen. Said I know I'm in your feelings, baby, and I know that you've been hurt like crazy, but I've got good intentions, baby. So let me finish what I'm saying. If you found love that never faded, would you let it go or would you save it? Are you open for this conversation? 'Cause I want you with no hesitation. And you did all you could. Oh yeah. But can I have this dance to give you real romance? Just give me a chance to love you the right way. The right way. Girl, let me love you the right way. The right way. Girl, let me love you. No matter what it takes, yeah, yeah. Huh. Said I'm just here to give you what you need. Girl, I vow to give you all of me, yeah. I always keep my promise, and I'll always be honest, 'cause this love is uncommon. Yeah, baby, I'm falling, yeah. No one from my past and past is. Girl, this love is so long overdue, yeah. Girl, I've got some special friends for you. Tell me how forever sounds, 'cause he didn't love you, no. Oh, yeah. Can I have this dance? Yeah.